Hi, everyone. I'm Jay McBain, Chief Analyst for Omdia of partners, channels, alliances, and ecosystems. Excited to be here today to talk about the next era of partner orchestration, building resiliency in a hybrid and multi-cloud world. So I always like to start with the numbers. And when we're talking about resiliency, we're talking a lot about different parts of our industry. There's hardware elements, there's software elements, there's obviously services wrapped all around this. And of course, there's operational and business resiliency that we'll be touching on as well. But if you start to add up the target addressable market size that we're all looking at different levels, it covers multiple parts of our industry. So we'll try to touch on that today, try to bring this all together where the opportunity is as we step into the AI era and how we all can take advantage of this next step in technology. First of all, our industry, the 5.3 trillion that I just showed, is over 70% sold through partners today. And that is staying relatively stable given the rise of marketplaces and other things. But mostly what we're talking about today is the 96% of that spend by customers, from the smallest flower shop to the biggest bank to the biggest government. That spend that is surrounded by partners. We don't just count who transacts the deal. We're interested in who's helping the customer in co-marketing and co-selling, who's consulting and designing and architecting the deal, configuring, obviously implementing, integrating, managing hundreds of different services. On average today, McKinsey would say that there are 7 partners around a medium to large size deal. And we're going to talk about that orchestration. And we're going to talk about that in the frame of resiliency. So first of all, obviously the channel is a big place. The technology industry, growing at 7% this year, is growing 3 to 4 times larger than the world economy, what our customers are growing at. And when we talk about resiliency, it's growing at about double that. So it's obviously dragging in a lot of different kinds of partners. And many of you from different legacy types are coming in to take advantage of this opportunity with Commvault and to see this move into 2026. But there are millions of partners out there of different types and tens of millions of people that are taking on new roles in cyber, taking on new roles in data, and obviously helping customers through all of this. One of the things that we did recently at Omdia is went top down. And for the first time ever, kind of looked around the world at the most capable, highest capacity partners from a services perspective. Not just a resell who transacts the most, but who is doing most of those hundreds of services at a bigger level. And what's interesting is you start to look at many of the logos on this slide, and you can imagine dragging each of these logos into a circle. But the fact of the matter is the 30 companies that sit in the middle transact more services than the next 970 around the white of the outside. And when you look at the 970, they transact more services revenue than the next million companies combined. So where we thought maybe it was an 80-20 rule or maybe a 95-5 rule, we're in a 99.9, 0.1% rule. What's interesting is these 1,000 companies generate $1.07 trillion, or 2/3 of the entire tech services market globally, is done by a very few. So looking around the world at where these companies sit, look at the legacy types, whether system integrator, a VAR, an MSP, a reseller, different types in terms of how they came to market, but really looking at this market top down in a way that we never have before. Obviously, when we're thinking about resiliency, we're thinking a lot about infrastructure. We're thinking about infrastructure from the edge through hybrid, virtualized, co-located, right up through multi-cloud environments. So we're watching, for example, at the data center level. And when you see server sales and you look at the left-hand column, those are growth numbers in the triple digits that we've been facing over the last couple of years. Obviously, the rise of NVIDIA and other things, but driving obviously the storage market. We're starting to see double-digit growth there. We're seeing a rebound in the networking market. So we're starting to look at the topology of this next 20-year era. Obviously, client server running from about 1980 to the year 2000, cloud running from about 2000 till just a few years ago, as AI from a consumer perspective picked up. But these blend these two eras together. And from edge to cloud, we're going to see a lot of activity and building out our resiliency plans really from edge to cloud. Watching, obviously, the hyperscalers with growth in the 20s, 30s, some of them 40s. We're watching as this continues, and you can see these numbers dip upwards as we start to think about multi-cloud. We think about the workflows, we think about the workloads and the containers and where all of this is going to take place and how we're going to secure this, how we're going to back this up, how we're going to build these plans around our customer. As more and more data, agentic AI-wise, comes through side doors and back doors, and as the software industry goes through some pretty large changes in terms of how data is transferred and obviously protected as that happens. Inside of this, we're obviously watching cybersecurity very closely. There are many companies chasing at the top a $94.6 billion market. And from a product perspective, we break it up into the major layers of a zero trust or a SASE or a NIST type of framework at the customer side. But each of these areas are growing, either at or north of double digits. But really what we're focused from a partner perspective is the $2 for every $1 of product that today is sold. And those services, by the way, are growing faster than the products. The products will finish 2025 at about a 9% growth, just shy of 10. The services around that, the products will grow at 11. Managed security services, for example, are growing at 15. So again, when I talk about the tech industry growing 3 or 4 times faster than the global economy, and we talk about opportunities for partners to grow double that, we see things like resilience and remediation and managed all coming into that play where partners can build a business that's growing at 15 or 20 or 25% around this opportunity, not just for 2026, but looking ahead for the next 3 to 5 years through the agentic phase of AI. We also look, inside the partner and the P&L in terms of where in the customer lifecycle is obviously the most sticky, highest revenue, highest profit opportunities. And we see, before the point of sale, the advisory and the consulting, the design services. We look at the point of sale, the opportunities there are there through procurement and provisioning. We obviously look post-sale at the deployment, the implementations, the integrations, the managed services. But around the cycle here, there are significant opportunities. And around resiliency, 91.6% of it flows, to, through, and with partners in one way. So a great opportunity, not just today and this month, this quarter, but looking ahead in terms of where I would be thinking about, hooking my caboose to a fast-moving train that's leaving the station. So also wanted to dip into just managed services for a moment because most people don't recognize how large they've become. So we're at a moment now where $608 billion represents almost 15 to 20 cents out of every dollar that customers spend on tech and telco. And this large number, by the way, is 1.5 times larger than the SaaS industry overall, all the Salesforces and ServiceNows and Workdays. It's also 1.5 times larger than all the hyperscalers combined. Not just the big three, AWS, Microsoft, Google, but Oracle and IBM and Alibaba and everybody else as well. So it's a massive market and it's growing at 13%. And as we look into 2026, more customers, 82% of them are going to outsource more of their IT, more of their security, more of their resiliency than they did last year. So building out these recurring models, building out these every 30-day forever models for customers is a very rich environment for many of the partners here on this call and around the world who are taking advantage. So this is the moment we're at. I talked about the numbers, talked about the different markets in terms of what's growing and the double-digit growth that we're facing, but this is the platform moment that we're all in. And the platform economy to win this as a partner, understanding there's lots of ways to work with a vendor like Commvault. In the past, you may have thought about, resell as a VAR. You may have thought about managed services. You may have thought about system integration. legacy services types. But today it's really servicing the customer in all stages of the life cycle and participating as perhaps an integration partner. 44% of all partners in the world now are coding, building agents, and building software. And that integration work up and down, and it could be software, it could also be hardware, is key because the majority buyer that we now have, 51% of our buyers are millennials born after 1982. Their number one criteria for buying now is integrations. It's not the service, the support, the pricing, the brand reputation that perhaps baby boomers and Gen X would have thought. Integrations are everything. Buying best of breed and making sure everything works together. So working in this integration world is absolutely critical among the average 7 layers of the deal that the customer will end up buying. The next thing down the right-hand side is the services partnerships and the channel partnerships. I mentioned 91.6% of our market is really through partners, but at the same time, if there are 7 partners in doing different things, and again, this could be non-traditional partners, it could be agencies, lawyers, accountants, and others doing different kinds of technical services and FinOps and other types of things, but working as a team and building out all of these different ways to support the customer in the journey that the customer's on is absolutely critical at this stage. As we move to the left, we all have to think about alliances. And having alliances, obviously, in a multi-cloud world with the hyperscalers and the big SaaS platforms, having alliances built with the major cyber platforms, distribution platforms, telco platforms. This is a platform-led economy where you may even have alliances with people that you compete with because you compete in the morning and then by the afternoon, you're best friends and partnering. But it's all surrounded the customer and it's driving that customer forward. Sometime you will win level 1 of the deal and the biggest part of the deal, but sometimes you'll win layer 5 of the deal and may not be the strategic general contractor in front of the customer, but alliances become critical. And then probably most important is how we go to market. The average customer today spends 28 measurable moments before they purchase. So this is a considered purchase, and it looks like buying a car. It looks like buying, anything expensive. So buying $1 million of resiliency has a lot of work that goes into getting that customer to that stage. And each of these 28 moments, they can be co-sell moments or co-marketing moments. They can be co-innovation or co-development or co-creation moments. And then post-sale, because almost 2/3 of our industry now is subscription or consumption-based, post-sale, it's every 30 days forever. It's who is upselling, cross-selling, enriching, who's making sure that stickiness is there, that customer for life is there. So the companies that do this the best recognize that there's 5 different parallel paths of a platform, and also recognize that platforms are synonymous with partnerships. It's not just a UI or UX on top of disparate products. It's not a pricing bundle. It is truly all the partnerships necessary to bring that customer to a great outcome and to a point of delight that they happily renew and enrich and renew at a larger amount each cycle. So this is probably the most important piece and changes that we're going through as an industry. The economics of partnering and so much change underneath this. But when we reorient everything from our vendor, our distributor, partner, different kinds of partners, and we reorient around the customer and put them in the middle, we understand the 28 moments in green before the sale and where we can add value at all these services levels. We look at the point of sale and looking at where we can add value, whether we collect the money or not, whether the money goes to a marketplace, whether the money goes to another reseller, whether the money goes direct, however the money changes hands is becoming less important. But building that 7-layer strategy, building that 7-layer deal and working it through and provisioning that and deploying that into implementation, integration services, into managed services. And again, this flywheel never ends. It keeps cycling around and around and around as we look at renewing this and creating a customer for life, which is obviously the most profitable kind of customer to have. When I said that, the legacy types When we talk about a VAR, an MSP, a system integrator, an ISV, we always wanted to typecast a partner based on what they did. And all of you partners are shouting back saying, well, no, we serve the customer before, during, and after the transaction. We are not and have never been just, for example, a cash register. So when you ask broader set of 1 million partners around the world, over half are doing consulting services and charging for it. Over half are doing the design and architecture work. Start thinking about those zero trust, SASE, and other models. You look at 30%, almost a third are doing integration work. So they look like a system integrator at times. 2/3 are doing managed services, and that number is growing quickly. And that's that 44% number that are co-creating, that are developing software, writing agents. And so when you look at the customer journey, it is this model where partners are everywhere. And the average partner is doing 3.2 different business models, again, to delight that customer, drive profitable revenue growth. So we flip into this next 20-year era. And we understand that it's going to be built on top of platforms. We also understand it's going to be built on top of partnerships. The interesting thing is we move from generative AI in consumer to agentic AI in business is understanding that the first 2 years have been somewhat underwhelming. We've watched on the consumer side, for example, as NVIDIA became the biggest, most valuable company in the world. You watch every other day as they're making $100 billion or $500 billion agreements in a circular, kind of revenue economy in consumer. You watched as, for example, ChatGPT got to 2 billion active users monthly, fastest growing product in any category in history. But the consumer side doesn't equal the business side. We've been growing slower. And all of the early winners in AI that we thought, the GSIs and others that work on consulting and proof of concepts, have actually had lackluster growth. So yes, the business side is rolling out slower, but not to say that it is a failure, not to say it might be a trend that doesn't play out like metaverse or some of the others that we've had. It is to say that over the course of this 20 years, we're going to go through 3 or 4 major phases of AI, and the business side is going to create trillions of dollars of opportunity. So the first thing we did just last month is went and asked partners about their customers. So in this case, we were saying, is more of this happening direct? Are companies insourcing more than ever before? And the answer is no. 88% of agentic AI projects and consulting and early conversations are with partners. And, maybe 12% of customers are doing it in-house at the moment. We think that's going to drop as they see the complexity, as they see the compliance, the regulatory, the governance, the resiliency issues. We see that number dropping into single digits. And obviously this being a partner-led opportunity for the next 3 to 5 years. So we mapped it out in terms of what partners are doing today. We interviewed partners around the world. We started to map out the $59 billion today that's happening around agentic AI and generative AI and these strategies. And we mapped it out to 2030, $267 billion and a 35.3% compounded growth rate. If you look at that entire $5 trillion industry and look at every slice, this happens to be the number 1 fastest growing opportunity for partners. So jumping into all of the legacy services, jumping into the coding and agentic, the data layers, the cyber layers, the remediation layers, the resilience layer, there is a lot of work to do. And again, 88% and growing of customers are relying on partners to get this done. And building out a practice and building out a key part of our revenue in this area is critical. And making choices across vendors who are investing in this area and making sure that we're aligned to where this growth is critical as we think about fourth quarter and we think about going into 2026 and making sure that we're on this growth curve with the industry. And again, now we're talking about growing at 5x the tech industry, which is the fastest growing industry in the world. So these are unbelievable amounts of growth when our customers might be growing, at 2%. Now, the phases, the first 3 to 5 years, many partners dialing in today are heavy at work on rethinking their sales and marketing, rethinking their invoicing, billing, service tickets, all the pieces and parts of their business. And as they implement agents and as they implement AI strategies internally, it allows them to go out and have this conversation with customers. The one thing we do know 2 years into this AI era is that it's not a product. There's no SKU that every company in the world is going to have to go buy and bolt in. It's going to show up as feature, not product. And as partners, we know a lot about this. So if you're serving, let's say, a small restaurant, they've invested their entire technology budget probably on a platform like Toast or Square or Clover, the people running around with iPads around the restaurant. But this is how they do their staffing. This is how they do their charging. This is how they work with Uber Eats. This is how they order food. I mean, literally everything in the restaurant runs on one platform. They're going to watch that platform come in with agents and be able to do those things better, more efficiently, etc. As you move up from a restaurant and get into medium-sized business, hundreds of people that have now vice presidents, they've already built their tech stack. And whether it's a head of sales or head of marketing, head of HR, head of product, whatever it is, each of the 12 vice presidents have a pretty, complex stack that they've already built, and they're spending a lot of money and time on it. And they're going to implement agents through that. So as we start to think about resiliency, we're thinking about the 250,000 SaaS companies that are out there. All of these companies, as they connect together in these 7-layer stacks, and as we rethink every job role, as we rethink as data is passed back and forth through side doors and back doors, how incredibly important these compliance levels, these governance levels built around resiliency are. Now it starts to get fun when you start to look 5+ years out, 5 through 10, 15 years, as the world turns physical in a big way. Start to think about humanoid robots, but we start to think about all of IoT, the billions of devices that we delivered, not only are smart, but connected to the internet, but now they have large language model access and contextualize, some of these sensors and things that are out there. But the idea of humanoid robots is within this next generation. And the idea of having one in every home doing the dishes and washing, we're within the frame now of having them smart enough with these consumer models. ChatGPT version 10 by that time will be smart enough, obviously, to work around a house or work around humans. And just we're waiting for the dexterity and agility of the hands and some of the movement. But here we are. But that's not the promise of AI. The reason and where the opportunity relies on this big 20-year arc that we're in is here. 99% of the world's business data today has not been trained or tuned into models. It hasn't been indexed. It hasn't been cleansed. It hasn't been ready for it. For example, every flight that we've ever taken sits on a Sabre system put in place in 1964. Every banking transaction we've ever made sits on an IBM mainframe put in place in the 1960s, 1970s. So that data and the data across all 27 industries still sits outside of models. And that's been the slow moving, kind of part of the business, because there's a lot to consider before I'm ready to open up the doors. And 83% of that data, by the way, sits in cold storage at the edge. So if you start to think about where the data is and how this hybrid and multi-cloud resiliency world is going to work from edge to cloud, you start to think about where the data is, how the data is going to have to be opened and thawed and moved, and then how these models are going to work. And this is, over the course of 10 years, as companies start to think about making their chatbots smarter. Not only agentically when they cancel your flight and have to go book you a hotel and get you an Uber or get you a Hertz rental, but also from your own perspective. All of us have had canceled flights in our life and we all react differently. So some of us may want that hotel and, go out at 5 o'clock the next morning, but other ones of us may want to fly 6 hours away from our airport where the weather isn't as bad and then rent a car and just drive home that night. But that's the type of business and agentic all coming together with the world's data. And this is the resiliency problem that we're facing over this arc. When I talk about these really large growth rates in services and these tremendous growth rates that our industry is going to be facing, we're on the right call here. We're in the right event to talk about this bigger opportunity of where we're going to build our businesses to the next level. So I start to think about, the legacy services. Do I have the certifications and competencies to build out for these consulting and design, these advisory work that needs to be done? Do I have the data expertise across readiness, across cleansing and indexing, inferring? Do I have the resiliency strategies in place and the right people in the right places to help the customer, even outsource most of these pieces? Am I one of those 44% that are building agents and building that with resiliency in mind? All of these different services, again, hundreds of them, are what adds up to this 35.3% growth in our industry. And making sure that our businesses, we're working at a program level with Commvault. We're working to make sure that the education and training, development, again, certifications, competencies that we're building are connected to these large opportunities that we're facing. And we're taking advantage of this opportunity and taking advantage of it not only in all of our current customers who are, again, in the early stages of these conversations, but we're looking at it as a team sport. We may actually not be doing all the bullets here, and that's where larger deals may have 7 partners. And we're going to work as a team to deliver this outcome and deliver this next stage for the customer, and do it obviously in a, customer for life or a highly profitable, sticky scenario that they will continue to buy. So again, the world is getting more complex. What we do understand a couple of years into AI era is that it's going to be from edge to cloud, and from consumer to business, and how all this is going to play out. Every company is starting to think about all of the slices of that pie chart, how they're going to think about hardware and software and services and telecom, how they're going to pull it all together from edge to cloud, and where the data sits and where the data ought to sit, how the data is going to move, and how we're going to build a defense, against all of this data falling into consumer models, obviously data, business data that's been well protected and cold stored for so long, falling into the wrong hands. This is one of the biggest opportunities. It's obviously one of the biggest threats that we've ever faced as technology professionals. And when we start to see the complexity that our customers are facing, we start to understand pretty quickly why they're outsourcing more services this year than they did last year, and why they're going to be outsourcing more next year than they did this year. For them to be able to find the cyber talent, for them to be able to find the AI talent, for them to be able to pull together the team necessary to drive their outcome, and for them to stay ahead of their competitors, is where we're at. And we know in these 20-year cycles, if you look at the Fortune 500, 52% of companies from 20 years ago no longer exist. And it's worse if you look at non-Fortune size companies. But the fact of the matter is, this is the cycle that you start to look at this and staying ahead of your competitors. And AI is one of these things that could knock companies out of the Fortune 500 or out of business and get acquired because they're not taking the right moves today. And again, those who rely on partners, those who are investing more in outsourcing service partnerships, are the ones that are winning today. The companies that are winning today in the channel, in partnerships, are the ones that are looking at these platform models very carefully and making sure that they're at the right stage and have the right relationships. And again, have hooked their caboose to the right train, leaving the station really quickly. Thank you so much for the time today. Really enjoyed kind of walking through the future of where our industry is. I hope you have a great rest of your event. Thank you.